You are sitting around a campfire. The sky has just turned dark. There is no roof, there are no walls, there is nothing between you and the darkness except those burning flames. And on the other side of that light, in the darkness that your eyes cannot see through, there is something looking back at you, a pair of golden eyes, not moving, just watching, and for some reason you do not throw your spear. This is the story of how humans got the most loyal companion in history, not by planning, not by taming, not by doing anything smart or intentional. And here is what no one really tells you: humans did not choose dogs. We did not sit down one day and decide that out of all the animals running around on this planet, elephants, horses, bears, eagles, the wolf was the one we wanted to turn into a creature that sleeps on our pillows. There was no such plan, there was no such intention. And none of the people sitting around that campfire that night knew that the moment they simply did not throw the stone would change the trajectory of both species forever. Let us begin with a seemingly simple question. Before there were dogs, before there was any concept of an animal living alongside humans as a companion, what were humans living with? The answer is everything. Hunter-gatherers tens of thousands of years ago lived among woolly mammoths, cave bears, wild horses, antelopes, coming into contact with hundreds of large animal species every day, most of which could kill them without much effort. Their daily schedule had no room for social experiments with wild animals. It looked like this: wake up, try not to die, find enough food, try not to die again, sleep, repeat, every day, no exceptions. And not one species out of the hundreds they came into contact with became a companion, except one. This is where everything starts to get strange. Dogs are not just the first animal domesticated in human history. Dogs came earlier than the next one by a huge, almost incomprehensible distance. Goats and sheep appear on the list at least 5,000 years later. Horses were not domesticated until around 6,000 years ago. All of those came later, all in the context of humans who had already settled down, who already had agriculture, who already had clear practical reasons to keep animals around. Dogs were completely different. Dogs came from the Stone Age, when humans were still thousands of years away from thinking about farming. There was no agriculture, there was no settlement, there was no clear economic reason to feed a carnivorous animal that competed with you for food. A gap of 5,000 years between dogs and the next species, and no one has ever explained satisfactorily why that gap existed. Now there is a very popular story about how this happened. A brave prehistoric person found a litter of abandoned wolf pups, brought them home, raised them with love and affection, and from that created the first companion. Touching, compelling, completely not how it happened. Because that story leaves out a very basic biological reality. Wolves cannot be domesticated, not because of a lack of patience, but because their biology does not allow it. You can raise a wolf pup from the moment it opens its eyes, hand-feed it, sleep next to it, spend all your time socializing it, and it will still, fundamentally, be a wolf. It will still have wolf instincts. It will still be dangerous in ways that no amount of training can completely erase. Zoos know this. Sanctuaries know this. People who have tried know this, often in very painful ways. The idea that ancient humans domesticated wolves through sheer willpower is the kind of thinking that gets people bitten. So if humans did not intentionally domesticate wolves, what really happened, and why did it only happen with wolves, not with bears, not with horses, not with any of the hundreds of species that ancient humans faced every day for tens of thousands of years? This is the leading theory today, the one most supported by science, and also the one that makes the most logical sense, and it will make you read it again. Wolves domesticated themselves. Humans did not choose dogs. Wolves chose this, in a sense. And that sense is not at all romantic. It did not begin with love or connection or some special moment of crossing between two species. It began with garbage. As ancient humans became better hunters, they began to create something that no other predator in the ecosystem could create at this scale: consistent and reliable garbage. Leftover bones, scraps, animal parts they did not eat. For an opportunistic species like wolves, that was equivalent to a stable food source appearing that required no hunting, no risk, no energy expenditure. Some wolves began to approach human areas to take advantage of that food source. Not all of them, only some. And not the biggest or most aggressive ones. Those did not want anything to do with creatures who carried fire and threw spears. The ones who approached were the ones that were slightly less fearful, slightly more curious, slightly calmer in close proximity to humans. Those ate more, lived better, reproduced more, and their offspring inherited those traits, not because anyone taught them, but because the genes of the calmer wolves were spreading through the population, generation by generation, with absolutely no human intervention required. Over many generations, not a few years, this created a selective pressure that no one planned and no one designed. The wolves closest to human camps were by definition the ones with the lowest stress response to humans, the calmest, the least aggressive, the most likely to keep approaching instead of fleeing. The wolf populations around human settlements were quietly self-selecting for friendliness, and no one realized it was happening. In 2025, Elzinga's research group at Proceedings of the Royal Society B built a computer model that accurately simulated this process, and the results confirmed that with only the selective pressure from approaching human food sources, wolf populations could completely transform themselves toward domestication without any intentional intervention from humans. And humans, for the most part, did nothing. They did not actively choose, they did not train, they did not plan, they simply did not throw the stone. Humans did not domesticate dogs. Humans simply did not throw the stone. And that is the difference between a species that changed history and a species that vanished into the darkness. But before we go further, we need to be honest about one thing. Scientists have been debating the exact timing of dog domestication for decades, and honestly, they are still debating it. The best current estimates span a very wide range, from 15,000 to more than 40,000 years ago. The reason that range is so wide is because the archaeological record is very messy. DNA does not lie, but it gets confusing when populations interbred with each other over thousands of years. Ancient bones do not come with timestamps. And organic material, skin, fur, wood, everything soft that this story might have left traces of, almost never survives tens of thousands of years in the ground. So when science says we are not sure when, that does not mean nothing happened. It means the physical evidence of that event had disintegrated long before any archaeologist showed up to look for it. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but the real problem is not the lack of evidence. The bigger problem, and the one fewer people talk about, is that science has been asking the wrong question from the beginning. For centuries, the central question of every study on this topic has always been, what did humans do with dogs? That question carries a very large hidden assumption that humans were the only active subject in the story, that this was a decision, an action, an intention on our part. But modern genetic evidence shows something much more complex and interesting. Dogs show signs of being domesticated independently in multiple places around the world. East Asia, the Middle East, possibly Europe, at different times, by groups of people with no connection to each other. Not a single moment, but a repeating pattern across the planet. And that changes everything. Because if this was a pattern rather than an event, if humans and wolves kept finding each other in different places at different times with no coordination or plan, then the question is no longer what did humans decide? The question becomes, what is it about both of these species that made them unable not to find each other? This is not a story about choice. This is a story about convergence. And convergence does not require anyone to decide. It only requires the right conditions, the right time, and enough time. In 1914, miners extracting basalt in the Bonn-Oberkassel region of Germany accidentally dug into an ancient grave. Inside were two human skeletons, one male, one female, and lying beside them, an animal skeleton. At first, no one paid much attention to that third skeleton, but in the decades that followed, it became the focus of a long academic debate. Was this a wolf or a dog? Was it placed there intentionally, or just a coincidence of the strata? What did it mean in relation to the two people buried with it? Or was it just a random detail we were overinterpreting? Modern DNA and bone morphology analysis finally gave a clear answer. This was a domestic dog, not a wolf. Dated to around 14,200 years ago, making it one of the earliest confirmed pieces of evidence of a domestic dog buried with humans. But it was not that information that changed everything. What changed everything was the condition of those bones. When researchers examined them more closely, they discovered the dog had suffered from canine distemper, a serious viral disease that attacks the nervous system, causing partial paralysis, loss of coordination, seizures, and overall debilitation. This was not a disease that killed in a few days. It lasted many weeks, sometimes months, before leading to death. Throughout that entire period, the dog could not forage for itself. It could not move normally. It could not warn of danger. It could not assist in hunting. It could not do anything of practical value for anyone. And it still survived long enough for the disease to progress to its final stages. That could only have happened if someone had been feeding it, caring for it, staying by its side throughout the final weeks of its life. Ancient humans had cared for a sick dog, completely without practical use, for many weeks. Then when it died, they did not leave its body behind. They buried it with their own dead, as a member of the group. Bonn-Oberkassel is not the only case. From this period onward, dog remains began to appear in many human graves in many places around the world, not as food, but as companions. Some graves had dog skeletons carefully arranged beside humans, sometimes with a human hand placed on the animal's body, a gesture that anyone looking at it would immediately understand the meaning of without needing a single word to explain it. Let us pause here for a moment. Tens of thousands of years ago, in a world with no medicine, no surgery, no safety nets of any kind, when a human being injured or sick often meant death, ancient humans still set aside scarce food and limited energy to care for a creature that could do nothing for them. Then grieved when it passed, then buried it with rituals like burying a family member. This was not a tool being maintained. This was not a food source being preserved. The relationship between humans and dogs had crossed the boundary of practicality very early, earlier than anyone once thought, and in ways we still do not fully understand. But here is the question that no one asks loudly enough. If wolves were changing to live near humans, then were humans changing too? To answer that question, we need to go to the Soviet Union, the 1950s, and a scientist named Dmitry Belyaev who was conducting research under conditions that could generously be called stressful. Genetics at that time was regarded by Soviet authorities as bourgeois pseudoscience, a sentence that needs a moment to fully digest, because it means genetic research could get you arrested. Belyaev found a way to continue his work under the cover of breeding silver foxes for the Soviet fur industry, a boring enough reason that no one paid attention. What he was really doing was starting a selection experiment with a criterion so simple it was almost ridiculous. In each generation, only the foxes that were the least fearful and least aggressive toward humans were allowed to reproduce. That was it. No selection for size, coat color, speed, or any other trait, only one criterion: attitude toward humans. And what happened next was something no one in his research group predicted. In just a few generations, a few decades, not thousands of years, the foxes did not just become friendlier toward humans, they began to change physically in ways Belyaev had never asked for. Ears flopped down, tails began to curl up into arcs. Fur developed white and brown spots instead of uniform silver. Faces became rounder and shorter. Skulls changed shape. Reproductive cycles shifted. They began to bark differently. They began to actively seek human attention, wag their tails when people approached, and maintain eye contact, something wild foxes never do. They looked and acted so strangely like dogs that it was impossible to explain if you did not know what they had started as. No one had asked for any of that. Belyaev did not select for floppy ears. He did not select for curly tails. He did not select for white spots or round faces. He only selected for attitude toward humans, and the entire package of changes followed as if they had been waiting to be triggered. What Belyaev accidentally discovered, and what scientists are still studying in detail today, is what is now called the domestication syndrome. The genetic pathways related to low-stress response and friendliness toward humans are linked at a deep biological level to a whole series of completely unrelated physical and behavioral traits on the surface. When you select for one trait, you inadvertently pull along an entire package of other things that no one ordered and no one expected. But the more important meaning lies in the speed. This experiment showed that it does not take thousands of years for a species to change fundamentally. With strong and consistent enough selective pressure, the basic characteristics of a species can shift significantly in just a few generations. The wolves living near human camps tens of thousands of years ago may have begun changing much faster than we once imagined. Dogs were not designed. Dogs were not created by human hands. Dogs emerged as the inevitable consequence of environmental pressure acting on a population flexible enough to respond. And that is completely different from everything we once thought about this story. If that change happened with foxes in just a few decades under Belyaev's hand, then what happened on the human side over tens of thousands of years living alongside those wolves that were gradually becoming different? Did we change too? And if so, what did we change into? The anthropologist Brian Hare at Duke University gave this a name, and the name is worth pausing on: survival of the friendliest. Not the strongest survives, but the friendliest. The core argument sounds simple, but has very broad consequences. In complex social environments, the ability to cooperate and read the signals of others has higher survival value than pure physical strength. It is not the biggest or fastest or most aggressive animal that lasts the longest, but the animal best at navigating social relationships with the other species around it. This is true for humans, and it turns out it is also true for dogs, but in a way so specific it is strange when you actually look at the evidence. Try a simple experiment in your head. You are sitting in a room with a dog, a wolf that was hand-raised from puppyhood, and a chimpanzee. You point toward the corner of the room. Which one will look in the direction you are pointing? The dog will look immediately. The wolf, even one raised by humans from the first day, socialized intensively every day for years, will not reliably do it. The chimpanzee, our closest genetic relative, sharing more than 98% DNA with humans, cannot do it either. But a puppy that has never been trained a single day, that has had very little contact with humans, will look in the direction you point as if it is the most obvious thing in the world. This is not a behavior learned through training. This is genetic, shaped over thousands of generations living alongside humans to the point where the ability to read human gestures has become part of the species' neural structure. No other species on this planet has that. Not even species that are far more intelligent than dogs in general cognition. And this is the crux of the entire story. Dogs are not smarter than chimpanzees. Dogs do not have better memories than dolphins. Dogs do not solve complex problems better than crows. But dogs have one very specific kind of intelligence, reading human intentions and communication signals. And that kind of intelligence happens to be the only one that really matters in a relationship with humans. That created a feedback loop operating at the most concrete level of survival. Dogs warn when danger approaches because their sense of smell detects what human noses miss, assist in hunting by tracking scents that human eyes cannot see, detect changes in the environment before humans realize something is different. Humans give back food, warmth, protection that a single animal could not obtain on its own. No one sat down and designed this exchange. It formed because it worked. It worked extremely well for both sides, at the most practical and concrete level of getting through each day. Dogs are not better than every other animal. Dogs are only better at exactly one thing, and that one thing happens to be what humans needed most. But here is the part that most people do not expect. We have talked about how dogs changed to live with humans. But humans also changed to live with dogs, and that change happened not at the level of culture or habit, but at the biochemical level, inside the brain, inside the hormone system, in places you do not control and often do not know are happening. Let us start with one fact about wolves. In wolf society, direct eye contact is a dominance challenge, not a friendly gesture, but a declaration of war. Wolves do not look each other in the eyes unless they are preparing to determine who will win the upcoming confrontation. But dogs have evolved to do the complete opposite, seek out human gaze, treat the human face as the most important source of information in the environment. This is not a small change. This is a complete reversal of a basic social reflex that had been deeply etched by millions of years of evolution into their ancestors. And when a dog looks you in the eyes like that, something happens in your brain that you are not even aware of. Your brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone, not a metaphor, not a subjective feeling. This is a measurable biochemical response, confirmed by research from Meho Nagasawa at Azabu University, published in the journal Science in 2015. And at the same time, the dog's brain also releases oxytocin, a complete closed loop. The dog's gaze triggers oxytocin in humans. Humans respond more warmly. The dog receives that signal and increases its own oxytocin, which makes it keep looking, which continues to trigger oxytocin in humans. Two species chemically bonding through a single look, in a loop that no one consciously started. Does that mechanism sound familiar? It should, because it only exists in one other place in nature, between a human mother and her newborn infant when they look into each other's eyes in the first hours after birth. Dogs have evolved to trigger the same biological system that the human brain uses to bond with its own children. And wolves cannot do this. Nagasawa tried the same experiment with hand-raised wolves. Result: oxytocin did not increase. The mechanism only works with dogs. In 2019, Julianne Kaminsky at the University of Portsmouth found the anatomical reason. She discovered a small muscle right above the eyebrow of dogs, elevator anguli oculi medialis, completely absent in wolves. When used, this muscle creates the expression people call puppy dog eyes, eyebrows raised, eyes looking bigger and softer, the face appearing more vulnerable, in a way that triggers the caregiving reflex in humans, the same reflex that a baby's face triggers. No one asked for that muscle to appear. It appeared because the dogs that had it were treated better by humans completely unconsciously, fed more, kept closer, and that trait spread through the generations without ever needing to be consciously selected. You think you love your dog because you chose to love it. The ancestors of that dog spent thousands of generations evolving to make sure you could not help it. Think about the Von Oberkassel dog again. Ancient humans 14,200 years ago cared for a sick dog with no practical use, then buried it like a family member. The same species, the same creature with the same capacity for feeling, the same nervous system, the same ability to feel pain and attachment, many centuries later was placed on laboratory tables like an emotionless device used to test cosmetics, locked in facilities without natural light. the same species, two worlds that could not be farther apart, and both are products of humans, of the same species, in the same civilization, sometimes in the same century. Today, dogs occupy a place in human society that no other species can approach. They live inside our homes, sleep on our beds, appear in our wills, have their own social media accounts with more followers than most humans. When dogs die, we experience real grief, not a passing sadness, but a neurological and emotional pain similar to losing a human family member, recorded in brain studies, not because we are projecting or overly sensitive, but because as far as our brains are concerned, that is almost exactly what they are. We make medical decisions for dogs that we sometimes do not make for ourselves. We apologize to them when we come home late. We ask them how their day was, even though we know they cannot answer, and somehow feel like they understand. At the same time, that same humanity abandons old dogs that are no longer cute at shelters, gives up dogs when they no longer fit the new schedule, buys dogs like accessories, and returns them when they do not meet aesthetic expectations. Not one cruel person or one uncivilized culture. Both attitudes coexist in the same society, sometimes in the same neighborhood, sometimes in the same person at two different stages of life. No one designed this relationship to end up here. There was one wolf hungrier than the others, a little less afraid, eating leftover bone scraps at the edge of a human camp. And thousands of years later, someone is spending a significant amount of money on grain-free organic salmon food for a 3-kilogram animal lying on a couch more expensive than most furniture in the house. Evolution is patient, and sometimes it is very funny, but the question remains, not easy to answer, and not to be answered hastily. We and dogs have walked a very long way together, over tens of thousands of years, to build something no other species on this planet has with us. What are we doing with it? Let us go back to that night once more. But this time you bring everything we just went through. The wolf at the edge of the firelight, golden eyes in the darkness. The ancient human did not throw the spear. The wolf did not run. Nothing happened. The wolf did not make any strategic decision about the future of its species. It was only doing what survival pressure over many generations had shaped it to do. Approach instead of flee. Because the ones that approached had eaten better, lived better, had more offspring. The ancient human also did not make any humanitarian or strategic decision. They only did what most people do when not threatened, not react, not throw the stone, just leave it alone. And from the moment when nothing happened, everything else followed. Why dogs and not other species? After everything that has been said, the final answer is still strangely simple. Because only wolves were fearless enough to approach, and only humans were non-hostile enough not to drive them away. No other species out of the hundreds that ancient humans contacted every day had both of those conditions at the same time, for long enough to create something. Bears were too dangerous, horses were too timid. Only wolves, with their complex social system, with enough behavioral flexibility for some individuals to adapt while others did not, had everything needed to cross that boundary. And that has consequences far bigger than the story of two species. There is a serious argument in science that human groups with dogs that warned of danger, assisted in hunting, detected things human senses missed, had a real survival advantage over groups without them. We did not just create dogs. In a very real sense, dogs helped create us. The next time a dog looks you in the eyes, your brain will do something it only does with babies, without asking your opinion, without needing explanation. Just one look, and thousands of generations of mutual evolution manifesting in a single second. That bond was built from hunger and fire and moments when nothing happened. It has lasted longer than every empire, every language, every civilization that has risen and fallen since that night. And it is still happening, right now. If you like the story of how two completely alien species found each other in the darkness and accidentally changed the history of both, then this is the channel for you, because we do this every week with other mysteries of humanity that science has only just begun to answer. Subscribe so you do not miss it. And if you have a dog lying next to you right now, look it in the eyes once, because now you know exactly what is happening in both of your brains.